Renee, the more you dig in, the more limited patients remaining options appear to be.
Well, Jennifer, that breakup cut state retirees off from Carle Foundation Hospital and its surrounding clinics, where Carle employs nearly 550 doctors. At this point, Aetna Medicare plans are no longer accepted at Carle facilities within 50 to 80 miles of Champaign-Urbana, where there's a high concentration of state retirees because of the university. Congressman Davis told reporters here this evening that he's used to playing defense in the general election, but not so much in the primaries. Now, Congresswoman Miller, who represents the old 15th district, has the Trump stamp of approval in making this race yet another test of the former president's sway.
Renee, traveling has been treacherous for everyone, especially those heading home from work tonight. What are you seeing?
Well, McLeod, I actually have been looking down a little bit, turned around and looked up at the camera because it is blowing right in my face. I've got a good bit of deja vu going on here. Just 2 weeks ago to the day, standing right here telling you what was going on Neal Street. Well, Jennifer, the city set aside between $12 and $15 million to pour into making this neighborhood a safer, more structurally sound place to live. But those projects are still a while out. Now, the Garden Hills Association president told me today he's been asking the city to be more proactive about concerns consistently brought to city council, and that is exactly what this park is about.
This is WCIA 3 News at 6:30.
I couldn't look the taxpayers in the eye and say that they got their money's worth. And I sure as heck couldn't tell my constituents who were in these plans that, they were going to have a doctor available to them.
For the first time in a decade and the second time ever, a state agency is in the process of picking health insurance companies to provide the plans that are offered to retired state workers. Now, that's a big investment. The state handed nearly $3 billion over to the Illinois Department of Central Management Services so far this year alone. Now, since 2018, 5 companies have been cut checks for more than $13 billion and counting. 2/3 of that money comes straight from taxpayers. The other third is pulled from the paychecks of those state retirees. Now, as the money continues to pour in, as doctor options continue to shrink, healthcare advocates and state lawmakers alike are beginning to wonder, what are we actually paying for? And will healthcare access improve for these seniors in the next year? What responsibility does the state have in this?
Well, basically with the state, come October 1, we have open enrollment. If this isn't remedied or another insurance isn't offered, we only have one choice.
University of Illinois retiree Melody McDaniel is right. If the people like her living in the 47 counties in blue rule out Aetna because of its diminished doctor network, a more expensive United Healthcare plan is all that's left.
In my opinion, that kind of creates monopoly in the state.
I put this at the feet of the state.
Renee, the Target 3 team broke that news today.
Jennifer, we obtained a screenshot of an email sent to Blue Cross staff. It says Hammond left the company to, quote, pursue new endeavors. Now, a spokesperson has since confirmed that's authentic, but she wouldn't go into specific details about what's behind that abrupt exit. Now, sources inside the Chicago office building tell us he was fired. Now, Hammond was directly involved in negotiations with Springfield Clinic that resulted in Blue Cross kicking the clinic's 650 providers out of network in November. Now, this is important because Christie Clinic's primary care providers here, they make up 2/3 of the available doctors all throughout Champaign-Urbana for patients who are listed in the directory Aetna mailed to Good upon request. I quickly realized, though, this entire directory is riddled with errors. We spent hours over several days calling through this list of doctors. It's the Aetna Medicare HMO plan, only to find half of the options advertised to Champaign-Urbana patients weren't real. A few were actually specialists, like oncologists or cardiologists, not someone you'd see for a checkup. Others simply weren't taking new patients at all. And when we couldn't find them online, we drove to the doctor's offices. Places Aetna claimed are, anyway. This is supposedly the location of a Dr. Patel off University Avenue in Champaign. A receptionist at the dentist office next door says he's retired.
If something happens and I'm very ill, I'm not going to have the time or the energy or whatever it is that you need to make these phone calls and be told one thing and then be told another thing and that sort of thing. And I don't understand why Aetna is doing this to, long-term customers.
You're watching your local news leader. This is WCIA 3 News.
No money could buy, what we've had living here all these years.
Is $25K really a fair market value for her? If there's no money from the city and the county, are you confident that investors are going to cover the
Absolutely.
cost? Why spend money to knock it down versus keep it? Do you think that one of the village board members, Terrence Stuber, running against you has anything to do with the village's decision, anything to do with this conversation?
You have to ask them about that.
That doesn't have the same zero tolerance standard for adults?
Well, I'm not aware that we've had cases of sexual assault or rape, that I'm aware of.
I'm sure you've heard of Vicki Schmidt.
Mm-hmm.
That would be one of those cases within the church.
Mm-hmm.
Does the supply chain really have the ability, if we increase our production here, to feed people across the world? How are you equipped to address the gun pipeline and gun culture that's clearly taken a hold of Champaign, and particularly our young black men and teens?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Is there a loophole in our criminal justice system that's making it possible that law enforcement doesn't know the origin of guns?
I'm glad you asked that question.
Target 3 investigative reporter Renee Cooper is with us. Renee, you sat down with the Attorney General this week.
We did, Jessica, and we focused on what's now known about the 21-year-old who's accused of opening fire from a rooftop in a quiet suburb, killing 7 and sending another 24 to the hospital. Bobby Cremo's unusual interest in violence was visible online for months before that day. So why didn't this surface until after the shooting? And if police had seen these posts ahead of time, what could they legally do to step in and potentially prevent mass violence? Now, some of the video in this story may be disturbing. We're showing bits and pieces, not to glorify the alleged shooter, but to show you what, less than a month ago, was readily accessible to anyone online. Bobby Cremo was likely best known to his online followers as Awake the Rapper, an artist and alias who posted violent content.
I hate when others get more attention than me on the internet.
In one music video, he appears to act out a school shooting, and disturbing animations also seem to trace back to Cremo. One depicts a shooter ultimately shot by police. I'm wondering, with our technology, why we're missing these warning signs, if there is any, I guess, what resources would be needed to have been able to do that?
Well, it all depends. You have millions, if not billions, of data points out there. And so while law enforcement certainly has a responsibility of being proactive, there's no way you can scan everything.
Attorney General Kwame Raoul's office partnered with the National Threat Assessment Center, or NTAC, in 2019 to train teachers, administrators, and faith and other community leaders to spot the warning signs.
We have to intervene.
As the chief of the NTAC, Dr. Lena Alathari sits at the helm of mass shooting research conducted by the U.S. Secret Service. The latest report shows the most consistent commonality among attackers is threatening or concerning communication ahead of time.
And I think a lot of it stems also from their motivation. So if you look at the #1 motive of those who engage in mass attacks is some sort of grievance. They feel wronged. And so when they are online, they are looking for connection with others. They're looking for those who will give them praise.
Dr. Alathari says some become so immersed, they almost believe they live in these violent depths of the online world.
And eventually they start to have a grievance with the physical space and almost want to punish the physical space, and that sort of feeds into why they carry out a mass attack.
The lines of reality are often blurred for those digesting the content even. So is it realistic to expect people who are on these sites to report those red flags?
What I can tell you, Renee, from the data, most of mass attackers, when they are using these sites, they're usually typically mainstream sites.
And when imminent threats were posted there, research shows potential attacks have been averted.
Some of them were stopped as they were on their way to school with a weapon. And when in those 67 cases, if you look at their planning behaviors, they were quite extensive.
The Illinois Attorney General says, based on what he now knows, if law enforcement had been made aware of Cremo's online activity, The state's red flag laws could have removed his gun rights.
There was clear sign to me that this person could be a dangerous person.
Well, I got a call from one of those people behind bars who detailed the strain of a full facility and being in a cell for 23 hours a day during COVID quarantine. He, like so many housed in the jails, is trying to manage his mental illness in the midst of it all. Meanwhile, the violence on the streets is spilling into the jails.
This is the location that we currently use for people that are going through their quarantine process.
I'm bipolar and I have schizoid characteristics, so if I don't talk to my loved ones outside, I get real agitated.
Casarius Meeks called me from the Champaign County Satellite Jail. He tells me the COVID quarantine process at intake sent his mental health into a tailspin.
They come out 1 hour a day.
The remaining 23 hours are spent in those cells, so 20+ inmates can filter out one by one.
If we had less inmates in quarantine, we could even do a 2-hour out.
Meanwhile, Meeks says needed mental health care is sparse.
No, it's inadequate. They say they don't have anybody on hand at the time, and they have somebody volunteer might come in once a week to get the people that's on suicide watch.
Mental health is contracted through WellPath, so they should be the ones speaking on their rounds, but they should have rounds in quarantine.
Everybody didn't quit, they said.
A WellPath spokesperson tells me they are short-staffed, but they have not responded to questions about how often people in quarantine get seen. That's the tip of the iceberg for a jail bursting at the seams, not including the 69 inmates housed up in Kankakee County. Who's filling the space? An increasingly younger population, according to the superintendent.
You know, the gun violence has gotten so severe that it's really affecting everything in here as well. Those same people and the same issues come into the jail.
Filling it to the brim just as corrections officers head for the door. And it's no coincidence.
Once they come in and they see that they may be having feces thrown at them, which is very common. It's very common for us to come in and have somebody who's got feces or
Don't
urine,
know, but I would
or they're
imagine.
being called every name in the book.
Is there a solution?
I don't think so, honestly, to be honest with you.
Now, Captain Voges tells me most of the violence is between people in jail, not directed at the staff. The issue is intervening. She says years back, verbal intervention would generally do the trick. Now, officers are learning that they have to have backup at the ready. Now, there's much more of this story that I'm putting online. Back to you.
All right, Renee, thank you so much.